What is up, hockey fans? Welcome to the Wraparound, brought to you by Sticks.com. I am your host, Emma Lingan. I am joined, of course, by my wonderful co-host, Mike Augello, today. And we have got lots to talk about, lots of bite-sized topics around the NHL. We've got playoffs, we've got Worlds, we've got Memorial Cup, all kinds of things to talk about. Before we do get into all of that today, though, do want to remind you we are brought to you by our good friends at Sticks.com. Why break the bank on sticks when you can get pro level composite sticks without the pro price tag at Sticks.com? That's STIX.com. Head over now and gear up. All right, Mike, we got to start. Dallas and Edmonton on Sunday. Rough game for Dallas. Edmonton has now taken a 2-1 series lead. They had a dominant 6-1 win in game 3 on Sunday. And, everyone's been talking about Dallas's depth, and that's been their strength coming into this Western Conference final. And it's interesting, though, because it seems like Edmonton, it's been their depth that has really stepped up in this series so far. You look at guys like Ryan Nugent-Hopkins has 2 goals, 5 assists. Zach Hyman has 2 goals and an assist. Evander Kane's got 3 assists. Brett Kulak's got a goal and an assist. I mean, is this the kind of production, do you think, that the Oilers have been missing from their depth players in previous seasons? And do you think Dallas can really launch a comeback here?
Well, game 3 was bizarre because Dallas, I think, especially in the second period when they outshot Edmonton 22-7, they were the better team in that period, and they scored a goal, and with I think 18 seconds left, McDavid scores, and that was the dagger. That was, I think, the balloon was deflated at that point because they put so much effort into catching up after giving up 2 goals in 36 seconds that they needed the payoff of being in that game going into the third period, and really after McDavid scored, it was pretty much over with. To the point of the depth, I still think Dallas has better depth than Edmonton, but Edmonton's depth and their defense have been scoring, and Dallas's has not stepped up. I mean, they're winning the top 6 battle, Edmonton is, and they're winning the bottom 6 battle. When that happens, that means a loss. So, and game 3, Jake Ottinger was not good. I think he needs to bounce back in game 4. This could be a very short series. I even suggested last night on Playoff Frenzy Live that if he loses game 4, I would put Casey DeSmith in because Ottinger just has not played well against Edmonton last year and now in a couple games this year. And it's desperation time for Dallas if they lose game 4 on Tuesday.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up Ottinger because I think that raises a bigger question about goaltending in this series, because the narrative has been heading into this series. It was, Jake Ottinger was lights out. He looked great, just like he has all year for Dallas. And then Stuart Skinner for Edmonton, he got chased in the first round by LA, got replaced by Cal Pickard for a little bit, then came back, and he's now had 3 shutouts. I mean, it seems like if you're talking about goalies getting hot at the right time, it is interesting to put these two side by side. So again, Skinner has stopped 60 of the last 61 shots that he's faced. Ottinger, meanwhile, as you said, has struggled. He's given up 9 goals total over the last 2 games. In Western Conference final games for his career, Ottinger is 5-8-0. He's got a 3.06 goals against average, 890 save percentage. That's in 14 Western Conference final games. Skinner, on the other hand, 6-3-0, 1.94 goals against, 925 save percentage in 9 Western Conference final games in his career. So I think if you were just going to do straight up compare these goalies side by side, almost everyone would say that Ottinger's the better goalie. But if you're looking at these two in Western Conference Finals series in particular, I mean, how much do you think this series this year could really kind of dictate the narrative around these two goalies? Because, Skinner, I think we can all agree, has never really been considered a top playoff performer. And Ottinger, do you think like maybe this kind of series between this year and last year, does this change the narrative around him as one of the top goalies in the league? Or do you think this is just kind of a fluke thing for these guys?
Well, if you remember after the Winnipeg Dallas series, everybody said, well, Ottinger, maybe he's moved ahead of Hellebuck in terms of Team USA for the Olympics in Milan next February. When you see him and how he's performed in the Western Conference Final, then it's back to Hellebuck again. The inconsistency is there. I mean, he's a good goaltender. There's no doubting that he's a very good goaltender. He's playing behind in front of a very good team. But when you need him to make the big save, Jordan Binnington in St. Louis, I think everybody would attest, he's an above average regular season goaltender, but he turns it on in the playoffs and he turns it on in the Four Nations, and he'll probably turn it on in Milano next February. So it's when you do things that really matters the most. And I mean, we know what Skinner is. Skinner is, Dr. Stewart or Mr. Skinner. He's Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. I mean, that's, one game he's phenomenal, and another one in the game he's a sieve. So I don't know if you can really depend on him, but right now they have no choice because their only other goaltender is Oliver Rodrigue, and Calvin Pickard still is not available. That's why I suggested Casey DeSmith, because he's at least an experienced goaltender. And in Vancouver last year, after Demko got hurt in the playoffs, they were supposed to go to DeSmith, and instead they went to Artur Svilovs and rode the rookie, and he played pretty well. But in this series, I mean, if Dallas is going to win, Ottinger's got to play well. And if he keeps playing the way he's playing, then Edmonton's going to be in the Stanley Cup final again.
Yeah, interesting to see what's happening with these goalies. The whole Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, I feel like Stuart Skinner reminds me a little bit of like a Tristan Jarry in that way. Like when he's on, boy, is he on. But when he's not, then look out. And I think that right now, Edmonton's got the hot goalie, and it's just, you kind of got to see if Dallas can mount a comeback. I agree with you, though. I think they do have more depth. I think that they just need to turn it on at the right time. And I think that they can do that. We'll just have to see in Game 4. Moving over to the East, though, the Florida Panthers have pushed the Carolina Hurricanes to the brink of elimination. Florida can potentially book their ticket to the Cup final for the third straight season if they get a win tonight, Monday. Florida has outscored Carolina 16-4 in the first 3 games of this series, and that is the largest goal differential through the first 3 games of a conference final in NHL history. So, not insignificant. Even if Florida was favored in this series, which I think, whether it's by the odds, the Vegas odds, the eye test, whatever you're thinking, I think a lot of people would agree Florida was favored to win this series. Did you think, Mike, that it would go this way? Did you think that it would be this lopsided of a series? And, sort of a follow-up to that, what has been the issue for Carolina here?
Well, I mean, going into this series, I mean, everybody remembers last year it was close, but they swept them. And I looked at this series at the very beginning as a team, as sort of like a little brother and a big brother basically playing the same way. They play the same style, but Florida's just more talented. They're more physical. And it's just not a good matchup for Carolina. So they're going through them like a snowplow in winter. It's really, I mean, it's sort of dazzling. I think some of the fault goes to Freddie Anderson, who had played great in the first 2 series against New Jersey and Washington. And in games 1 and 2, he was playoff Freddie again. And then they go to Kochetkov in game 3, and he played well for 2 periods, but then finally the Panthers broke through. I mean, it doesn't seem to matter who the Panthers put out there. Sam Reinhart gets hurt, hit knee on knee, and they put Jesper Boquist in, and he scores the game-winning goal. And, Nico Mikkola all of a sudden is Bobby Orr, making end-to-end rushes. And I mean, it's ridiculous. But now tonight, they're going for the sweep, and Mikkola is out, and Reinhart is out, and I think AJ Greer is out, and they're substituting 3 players for them. It's smart for Florida because I think they know they can beat the Hurricanes without those guys. So why risk them when they're going to need them for the Stanley Cup final? It's really men against boys in this series.
Yeah, it has been very lopsided, which, raises the question, I think, if Carolina does get eliminated tonight or in a few days from now, do you think that sort of will spark any kind of serious change within the organization in Carolina, similar to how we expect to see big changes in Toronto, for example? I mean, Carolina has made the playoffs for 7 straight seasons, but they still have not won a single game in the conference final, despite making it 3 times in that span. So 2018-19, they get swept by Boston. 22-23, swept by Florida. Now, again, they're down 0-3 to Florida. It's looking like it could be another sweep, but even if it's not, it's not looking good for Carolina. So do you think that, there's a lot of different narratives right now? Well, it's time for Rod Brind'Amour to go. Well, it's time for certain players to be traded or what have you. I mean, where do you think Carolina goes from here?
Well, it was Don Waddell as the general manager until Tulsky took over this year. Same ownership, same philosophy, same focus on analytics, the same philosophy toward goaltending, which is not having one. Or not having one that's going to make a difference. I mean, how many years have we said, well, if Carolina could just go out there and trade for John Gibson or trade for this guy or trade for that guy? They don't believe in it. They think that they can get away with average goaltending and having above average in front of them and winning. Well, okay, they used to have an above average defense, but Brady Shea's in Nashville and Brett Pesce is in New Jersey, and they filled in with Jaden Chatfield and Sean Walker and aging Brent Burns and Orlov. I mean, their defense is not good. I love Slavin. He's one of the best defensemen in the league. And they can't get a star player to stay there. Rantanen didn't want to stay there. Gensel didn't want to stay there. They've got a lot of really talented, smaller players, couple big guys like Svechnikov. But they've tried to improve that team. They've gone about it the wrong way. They keep playing the same system, and everybody knows they're playing that Rod Brind'Amour system. And if you know the secret to it, you can beat them, and they're beating it every single time if you're the Florida Panthers.
Well, and it's interesting too with the Brind'Amour system. I think, something that he does that it's not hard to figure out is that he just rolls all 4 lines. And if you look at the ice time for that team at the end of a game, it's like all the forwards have about the same ice time. And I think that works if you have a really deep team like a Florida, for example, or a Dallas maybe. But in Carolina, it's hard when the guys who are supposed to be your quote unquote stars, your Ahos, your Svechnikovs, they're getting the same ice time as guys like Mark Jankowski. Like it's just a little, it's like you said, it's pretty easy to pinpoint and figure out how you beat that system. So will be interesting to see what kind of changes, if any, Eric Tulsky decides to make in Carolina this offseason. And speaking of general managers, the GM of the Year finalists were announced. Unsurprisingly, Tulsky was not one of them. But the 3 finalists we do have are Kevin Cheveldayoff from Winnipeg, Bill Zito in Florida, Jim Nill in Dallas. Quick, Mike, who do you think, who would be your pick of these 3 and why?
I think I would take Jim Nill simply because of pulling off the Rantanen deal. I mean, Zito made, getting Marchand obviously has made a big difference. Getting Seth Jones out of a bad situation in Chicago I mean, I knew Seth Jones was still a really good defenseman, but right now, Chicago is sort of a cesspool of losing, and his skills would have been wasted there for the next 4 or 5 years. So he goes to Florida and he's plugged in, and Zito knew him from his time in Columbus. He's a good defenseman. He's always been and he's big, right-handed, who can skate. So getting him, Nico Sturm at the deadline and Marchand at the deadline, some good moves, but I just think I didn't think the Rantanen move just trumps them all. I mean, you get yourself a star player, and I love Logan Stankoven. I think he's a really good player, and they gave up a couple first-round picks, but you simply don't get players of the quality of Mikko Rantanen in a trade, and he did.
A mid-season trade at that. So I think that definitely I would have to go with Jim Nill as well. Interesting though, I think that obviously the Rantanen deal is the big selling point. I would also throw in the Wyatt Johnston extension. I think that that's a really, really shrewd move by him at this point. Speaking of Rantanen though, were you surprised at all, Mike, to see that McFarland from Colorado was not on the list? I feel like he was a name that may have kind of floated around there. Definitely one of the busier GMs this year, if not the busiest. But what do you think of him not making the list for all the moves that he made in Colorado this year?
Yeah, just to add one more, the Granlund CC deal with Nil and
Yep.
San Jose, that was another one because Granlund got a hat trick in the playoffs. That helped him, but we know it's based on regular season. I think the thing with McFarland is he did sort of what Kyle Dubas did in Toronto 2 years ago. He sold everything. He traded for Brock Nelson. He traded for Charlie Coyle. These were rentals. He made the move that he thought he needed to make by trading Rantanen because they couldn't sign him, and he gets Natchez and he gets Drury. I mean, these are all good moves, but he's going to have nothing to show for it because Brock Nelson's a UFA and Charlie Coyle is a UFA, and Natchez is 1 year away from being a UFA, so he's going to have to spend money to sign him. So they were good short-term moves, but they didn't. And I know the GM of the year is based on regular season, but you can't tell me that what they did in the playoffs didn't have some effect.
Definitely. You're right. All right, let's move on to the World Championships. Team USA defeated Switzerland 1-0 in overtime to win gold at the Men's World Championships for the first time since 1933. 1933 was the last time USA won gold. Mike, guy you're familiar with over in Buffalo, Tage Thompson scored the game winner in OT. He finished with 6 goals and 9 points in 10 games for USA during the tournament. Interesting enough, though, he was left off of Team USA's initial roster for the Four Nations face-off. He was called up as a reserve, never ended up suiting up in that tournament back in February. But could a performance like this at the World Championships help his chances of making the Olympic roster next year?
Well, he said he was going to the World Championships for the specific reason of wanting to stay on Team USA's radar. At the time that they chose the Four Nations roster, he was having an okay year, but there were players that you could make a case for that, they made the roster instead of him. But then in retrospect, guys like Chris Kreider and Brock Nelson and, Trocheck, maybe he would have been a better choice. He's definitely on their radar now. He had a hat trick in one game. He has the game-winning goal, golden goal. He can play center. He can play wing. He's big. He's not very tough, but I think he's definitely now put himself in the top 12 forwards for Team USA for the Olympics, and he can play with Eichel. I think he did briefly when Eichel was here. He is buddies with Austin Matthews Matthews is from Arizona. I think he grew up in Arizona. So, I mean, there is, I think he made an impression, and whenever you go to play for your country at the World Championships, which, may not seem like a hardship, but after a long year of playing 6 months of regular season hockey, and I'm sure you have bumps and bruises, do you really want to go to Europe and play more hockey? I mean, sometimes people look at it as a vacation, but you're still playing hockey and you're still playing competitive hockey against teams that want to beat you, because I think it means more to the European teams than it does the US or Canada. And the shocking thing of all, Emma, was Canada with that superstar roster loses to Denmark. And that sort of opened the way for Team USA.
Yeah, that was a shocker for sure. Another guy on Team USA, though, who really stood out was Frank Nazar from the Chicago Blackhawks. He had a really, really good tournament for the Americans. He led the team in scoring with 6 goals and 12 points through 10 games. And he is a guy who started this the 24-25 season with 24 points in 21 AHL games with Rockford before he was called up to the Blackhawks. And then, once he got to Chicago, 12 goals, 26 points in 53 games. So cooled down a little bit there. But I mean, what do you think? Do you think that a performance like this at Worlds will sort of elevate his status within the Blackhawks organization as far as, kind of maybe being their next best forward behind Connor Bedard?
I mean, I think they think that already. I mean, by the stats that you just read off, I mean, they were smart in the fact that they didn't just plant him in Chicago and say, go ahead. He was up and down with Rockford. He was learning his craft, over a point per game in the AHL, and put up decent stats in 53 games. So I think, he's obviously a work in progress. He probably has to work, minus 11. He probably has to work on the defensive side of his game. But offensively, he's extremely impressive. He scored 41 points in Michigan. Offense is not his problem. I know when he was drafted in 2022, the people that I hang out with when I go to the draft are all, draft nicks, and they thought that was an excellent pick by the Hawks. So, him and Bedard and probably whoever they take with their first round pick this year, which rumored to be somebody like Martone, or it could be, Hagens or Misa. I mean, they're going to get another good forward, but he's got a couple years on them. So, yeah, I mean, he's probably the second best forward that the Hawks have right now.
All right. Well, moving on to some off-season talk here. Looking at RFAs, this is always fun, always a fun time of year. Luke Hughes, one of the biggest names on the RFA market heading into the offseason. Obviously, defenseman with the New Jersey Devils. Now, of course, there's no reason to believe that he won't get a deal done with New Jersey. And I don't think anything is really going to stand in the way of that. But what do you think, just kind of ballpark, Mike, is an AAV that Hughes is deserving of, considering that this is likely going to be a guy who they sign long term as opposed to signing, a bridge deal? Because if you're looking around the league, a guy like Brock Faber in Minnesota, he re-upped for 8 years, 8.5 million AAV. Do you think that's a good comp, or where do you think Luke Hughes will fall?
Well, I think the factor here is the fact that they have Dougie Hamilton on their roster. I believe he's making 9.5. So I can't imagine Luke Hughes will be making more than that. Obviously, any young player of the talent of Hughes, they're going to want to get signed for as long as possible. So I can't imagine that they won't get him signed for 8 years, because Jack Hughes is there. And, we know in a couple of years, Quinn Hughes may be there. So yeah, I think he's going to end up probably below Hamilton. But, and Faber is a sort of different type of defenseman. Hughes has got, I think, more of an offensive upside. So I would say probably in the 8 to 8.5 range would make a lot of sense.
All right. Well, that'll be an interesting one to keep an eye on there. Last thing I want to wrap up with today, talking about the Memorial Cup. We've got Easton Cowan, Maple Leafs prospect. He and the London Knights defeated Rimouski 3-1 on Sunday in their second game of the Memorial Cup tournament. Cowan now leads all of the Memorial Cup in scoring. He's got 4 points. So he has accomplished just about everything at the junior hockey level. He won MVP, playoff MVP. He's got an OHL championship. multiple regular season and playoff scoring records. So looking at that and looking at where he is in his young career, where the Maple Leafs are right now, and looking to potentially be making some organizational changes, do you think that Cowan is ready to make the jump to the NHL next season with the Leafs, or does he still need a little more time?
Well, he was not old enough to play in the American Hockey League this year. And there was talk of maybe keeping him around and giving him a couple games to see. He stuck through training camp, but I don't think they just thought he wasn't ready. He wasn't strong enough. He wasn't, he's not a big player, but he's quick and he's smart. I think he'll go to training camp next year and I am going under the assumption that Mitch Marner will not be on the Leafs. I think they will go into training camp next year with an open mind to see whether he can steal a job. I don't know if they're going to place him right in Marner's place on the top line, but it depends on how well he plays. If not, he'll go down to the American Hockey League and they'll, see where things go. But I think there's an opportunity there. If the challenge is not too much for him, the Leafs could use somebody making less than $1 million playing in their top six. So I think there's a possibility. But, this year in junior, I think he only had 69 points. Clearly, the challenge of doing anything during the regular season, that was past him. He turned it on in the playoffs. He's scoring over a point per game in the playoffs, and now he's scoring like crazy in the Memorial Cup. This is his last year in junior, and I think he's proved he's sort of past it. He's better than, where he's playing right now.
Well, and talking about guys, they could use guys in Toronto making less than $1 million in their top six, especially when you got guys like Matthew Nyes who are going to be looking for big contracts. Speaking of RFAs, like we were earlier. So definitely Leafs with all of their changes or expected changes that we're going to see this offseason, whether it's Marner, whether it's guys like Easton Cowan coming up, making an impact, definitely be good to keep an eye on Toronto this offseason because we might be seeing some significant changes there. For now, though, that is going to do it for today's episode of the Wraparound. Thank you again to our good friends at Stix.com for sponsoring us. Thank you again, Mike, for joining me today to talk some hockey. Once again, I'm Emma Lingan. He's Mike Augello. This is the Wraparound, and we will see you again next week.